Jason McNew of Appalachian Technologies here, and this is Security Snark, where we discuss all the cybersecurity news that's worth discussing. Hey everybody, welcome back to Security Snark. This week, North Korean hackers are picking a fight with Russia. Malware authors can possibly hide malicious logic on solid-state hard drives. That's not new. The FBI says beware of free USB drives. That's not new either. And the Log4J exploits, Log4 shell exploits are still in the news and a big risk to operations. First up comes this piece from the Hacker News. I'm going to go ahead and read this. A North Korean cyber espionage group named Kony has been linked to a series of targeted attacks aimed at the Russian Federation's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with the New Year lures to compromise Windows systems with malware. This isn't, from a technical perspective, this isn't that unusual. So, nation states, and North Korea should not be underestimated. Like Iran, they have some fairly sophisticated cyber espionage capabilities, and they've managed to pull off some pretty good attacks. You remember the attack on DigiNotar by Iran, where they compromised one of the certificate authorities. And then there was the WannaCry debacle that came out of North Korea. That one was pretty interesting. And North Korea has actually developed their own fork of Linux. I believe it's called Red Star OS. Which is designed to track and control information. But what interests me is that North Korea is actively this is from a diplomatic perspective, because North Korea and Russia have, for a long time since the Korean War, they've had pretty friendly relations. So I'd be curious to see exactly what their motivation is here. And this has been going on for a couple of months, according to the Hacker News. And it goes on to say subsequent iterations of the phishing campaign are believed to have unfolded in 3 different ways, starting in October and then commencing up to, pretty recently here. So North Korea is running a highly targeted email phishing campaign against the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it's a credential attack. So I suspect that they're looking for specific information, probably about policy on behalf of Russia towards North Korea. But we'll keep an eye on this one as it unfolds and see what else hits the news. And next up comes this piece from bleepingcomputer.com, which is a website they carry a lot of great news. Firmware attack can drop persistent malware in hidden SSD areas, solid-state hard drive. And to me, this is not a surprise. And these are Korean researchers that have identified this flaw. And there's a set of attacks against solid-state drives that could allow planting malware in a location that's beyond the reach of the user and security solutions like endpoint protection and that kind of stuff. And basically, this deals with what they call an over-provisioning area. And again, it's an area on the solid-state drive where the manufacturer puts data that theoretically the user or your antivirus or whatever should not be able to access. Now, the thing is with solid-state drives from a security perspective, now from a performance perspective and optimization, they're great. But I remember when these things first started hitting the market, or at least when they first started coming down in price to the point where they're actually affordable. And we looked at the sanitization guides from the National Security Agency on these things. And for regular conventional drives with platters in them, there are sanitization guides. There is software that can wipe them satisfactorily and those sorts of things. But what the NSA said at the time, and this may have changed in the last couple of years, and I apologize if I'm not a date on that, but they said that there was no way to satisfactorily sanitize these devices and that they had to be pulverized. So that meant if it had any kind of classified data on it or something like that, you couldn't degauss the thing or use a wiping program or whatever to get rid of the data on it. And this is an example of a hardware level hack. And I remember getting briefed on a number of these things in the classified realm years ago that I don't think these things have been public. It also reminds me of the Trend Micro thing a couple years ago. We were finding hardware level hacks on these Trend Micro motherboards, and Trend Micro is like the Microsoft of motherboards. So again, this just goes to show why defense in depth is so important, because there are so many possible attack vectors to get into your system and ways to poison things or exfiltrate data or cause denial of service or any number of other things. But so these SSDs are not perfect, and I've always been a little leery of them because the NSA was a little bit cryptic on the sanitization, and the NSA doesn't always tell the public what they know about things. So use with caution. Next up comes this piece from CNN. Evidently, a prolific Eastern European cybercriminal group has been mailing, and by mail I mean snail mail, U.S. mail, infected USB drives to companies in the transportation, defense, and insurance sectors. And they're disguising these things as Amazon gift cards, either coming from Amazon or for the Department of Health and Human Services and that kinds of things. And this is a common technique for hackers or social engineers or whatever to masquerade as some other party in order to get people to perform some type of an action that's dangerous. This should not be happening. Okay, this is again, it's another form of phishing. Frankly, it's just not the same as sending somebody an email. And people should be, number one, there should be a policy for this, a company policy against using USB drives on a network that are not from that particular enterprise. And I've mentioned this many times here on Security Snark, but I've done something probably 50 assessments at least for companies of all different sizes. And I always find that USB sticks and removable media, which is optical media, external hard drives, and those kinds of things, they're always poorly controlled. So not only should you have a policy and a procedure, which is an administrative control in place to stop this from happening, this should be in your employee manual so that employees know that they can't bring USB sticks in. You need to also have technical controls in place in the forms of data loss protection. So if I plug a USB stick into my work computer, the computer shouldn't even recognize it or mount it. And then depending on the level of security that you need, it should even report that to somebody. And if you're trying to copy information to it, it should report that as well. But removable media needs to be controlled. And then keep in mind, this is how from what is publicly available anyway. This is evidently how the Stuxnet attack was perpetrated on Iran. Evidently somebody, I believe probably Israel and or the United States, the CIA, had seeded infected USB sticks on these Iranian scientists, and they had carried these USB sticks into their closed enclave. This network is not connected to the internet. Plug these things in, and that's how they were able to pull off this attack. So the fact that this attack vector is still being used, the reason they do it is because it works. But you got to control your media. You got to train your people. Very, very important. And finally, this week comes this piece from ZDNet. Log4J Flaw attack levels remain high, Microsoft warns. This isn't a surprise. This has been in the news, and this has even just been in the regular news, even if you're not a cybersecurity or an IT person. And the Log4j flaw, this was a flaw in the logging systems in the Apache web server. The Apache web server has something like 50% of the market share globally, right? So think of all the web servers on the planet. 50% of these things are susceptible to this flaw. And this flaw is extremely easy to exploit. It's just a matter of sending a string of a certain type of specially crafted code. And there's a bunch of ways to insert it. And this was one of those things. One of the things that makes the cybersecurity career field interesting is you could wake up one morning and then find that the world is kind of burning down, right? If you're a lawyer, an accountant, or a doctor, things don't really work that way because you're going to see something that's, some law that's coming down or some new regulation, or you're aware of some new development in the medical science space or something like that. But with the cybersecurity community, some new flaw hits the news cycle. You wake up in the morning and find out, 80% of my systems are vulnerable to this. So this one is going to stay in the news. This is a massive problem. It is very easy to exploit. The hackers can own an entire system. And I said this, I addressed this, I think, last week or the week before that. But this just goes to show why you have to have patch and vulnerability management in your enterprise. Because when these vulnerabilities pop up, you got to find them and you got to squash them. What we always say in the cybersecurity world is identification, containment, and then eradication. And it's not just useful for cybersecurity. Think of health problems, for example. Identification, containment, eradication. But patch and vulnerability management enables you to do this, right? You need to be able to identify these holes in your network. And this is a big one. This one reminds me again of the WannaCry thing. because that was around for years. It's still around. We still find it. We do vulnerability assessments. Nessus goes out, it scans the network, and we still find machines that are vulnerable to that. This one's going to be around for a while. It's a big risk. You got to have patch and vulnerability management on your network so you can find these things and like Log4j and get rid of them. Otherwise, you are putting yourself at extreme levels of risk. This is the functional, not having patch and vulnerability management. You may as well put a bag on your head and then run out into traffic. Not recommended.